It's funny how life can turn upside down in an instant. One second I'm kneeling in my yard, dirt sticking to my nails, lost in the ritual of pruning the jasmine. The next, a shadow falls across my back, and I hear footsteps approaching from behind. I freeze, every fiber of my body tense before I even turn around. I was tending my plants when it happened. And when I finally turned around, there stood my neighbor, his expression undecipherable. What happened next still haunts me. Not only because of the shock, but because of the lesson it taught me about human bonds and the subtle ways two souls can transform their worlds. Before I tell you the rest, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Leave your city in the comments. I'm always happy to imagine where these stories lead. That afternoon had begun like so many others. The warm, yet not oppressive sun filtered through the branches of the old olive tree that has dominated my patio since before I arrived. The scent of the turned earth mingled with the sweetness of the orange blossoms. My yard has always been my refuge, that corner where the chaos of the world is tamed. Orderly rows of plants bloom beneath my hands, each in its exact place, as if the entire universe could fit there. I had bent down to cut a wayward branch when a soft creak in the dirt path alerted me. My land doesn't have high fences, so it's not unusual for neighbors to stop by from time to time, but this was different. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if whoever it was coming straight for me. When I turned around, I saw him, Javier. We've lived on the same street for almost 2 decades, limiting ourselves to polite greetings and fleeting conversations about the weather, nothing more. He's a reserved man in his 60s, with that serenity that invites you to lower your voice in his presence. His graying hair was ruffled by the wind, and he was wearing a worn cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. I noticed specks of wood shavings clinging to the fabric, traces of his afternoons in the carpentry shop. "I didn't mean to scare you," he murmured, his deep voice rising above the hum of the dusk. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to hide the shock that was quickening my pulse. "You didn't," I lied. "I just wasn't expecting visitors." He gave a faint smile, as if he saw through my facade. His eyes rested on the jasmine. "They're more vibrant than last year. You've put your heart into this." I nodded, not understanding why my heart wouldn't calm down. There was something about his posture, non-invasive, but attentive, as if he were truly seeing me for the first time. I gestured to the trellis behind me. I try not to let them take over. They have a life of their own. He took a step closer, not intruding, just enough for me to catch a faint scent of sandalwood and fresh soap. His hands, roughened from years of manual labor, hung relaxed at his sides. For a moment, silence enveloped us. Only the rustling of leaves and the distant trill of a sparrow could be heard. Then she asked, "Do you ever get tired of doing everything alone?" The phrase threw me off. Did she mean the garden or something deeper? I felt its weight floating between us, silent, but impossible to ignore. I opened my mouth to reply, but hesitated, as if my answer might open a door I wasn't yet sure I wanted to cross. He didn't press the issue. Instead, he scanned the courtyard with a serene gaze, stopping at the stone bench nestled under the olive tree. "That's a good spot," he said quietly. "You can see the whole courtyard from there." "It's my favorite corner," I confessed. "Sometimes I sit there at dusk just to listen to the silence." His smile widened a little, but his eyes remained thoughtful. "Maybe I'll join you one of these nights, if you don't mind." The words were simple, almost casual, but they carried a subtle undercurrent that took my breath away. I told myself it was nothing, just neighborly courtesy. Still, I noticed the change in the air, that light breeze that alters everything. We chatted for a few more minutes, about the thieving squirrels devouring my lemons, about his latest piece of furniture in the workshop. Then he left the way he came, walking slowly along the dirt path until he disappeared behind the hedges. I stood there for a long time, scissors still in hand, as the sun sank behind the treetops. That encounter had stirred me, not uncomfortably, but as if a half-open door in a forgotten room were inviting me in. That night, in the quiet of my living room, I relived the moment I turned and saw him there. The warmth in his gaze, the way his words seemed to imply more than they said. It all stayed with me. I didn't know if anything would come of it. But one thing was clear. The next time I was in the yard, I would strain my ears for those footsteps on the earth again. The following days passed peacefully, although my mind never found peace. Every time I stepped into the courtyard, my eyes wandered to the path, waiting for that familiar creak. I told myself it was all nonsense. People don't appear just because you expect them to. But Javier's image, with his serene presence, lingered like the echo of orange blossoms after a gust of wind. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened again. I was on my knees, pulling stubborn weeds between the flagstones, when his shadow stretched across the grass beside me. My heart gave the same leap, but this time I didn't freeze. I turned, and there he was, hands in his pockets, squinting against the light. "I came to see if you could use an extra pair of hands," he said. I laughed, brushing the dirt off my palms. "You know this is voluntary forced labor?" "No problem," he replied, moving closer. "I've always liked getting my hands dirty." The way he said it, slow and measured, made the air feel a little thicker. He crouched down beside me, his shirt brushing my arm as he reached for a clump of herbs. We worked in silence for a few minutes, our movements synchronizing effortlessly. It was funny how natural it felt to have him there, in my haven, as if he'd always fit in. After a while, he leaned back on his heels, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "You've turned this yard into something magical," he remarked. "It feels like a balm." I looked at him, intrigued. Balm isn't always the right word. Sometimes it's just exhausting. "Maybe," he countered, his gaze fixed on me instead of the flowers. "But it's the kind of effort that leaves beauty in its wake. That's what's valuable." His words sank into me in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. We stood there for a long time, talking about everything and nothing, about how the seasons fly by faster each year, about the changes in the neighborhood since we arrived, about how bland the tomatoes from the supermarket taste. It flowed easily, like that conversation that makes you forget about the clock. At one point, he glanced toward the bench under the olive tree. "You said you sit there in the evenings," he reminded me. "That's right," I replied. "Maybe tonight." The invitation was modest, but there was a firmness in it that prompted me to accept without hesitation. And I did. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the branches, I brought 2 glasses of cold lemonade to the bench. Javier arrived minutes later, with that slow, purposeful gait. We sat next to each other, close enough to feel his warmth, but not touching. The sky turned orange and purple, and the air smelled of blooming jasmine. We didn't talk much at first. Instead, we let ourselves be enveloped by the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the faint groan of the stone beneath our weight. It was an eloquent silence, one that spoke volumes than any words could. Finally, he broke the spell. "You know," he said quietly, "most people just pass these moments by, always waiting for what's next." I did it for years, and now, I asked. Now I learned to stop, to observe things and people, not just gardens. His eyes met mine, steady and curious. I felt a warmth in my chest unrelated to the sun or the drink. I didn't answer immediately, afraid of breaking the magic. I let the silence stretch, confident that he understood. We stayed until the daylight faded and the first stars appeared. When he stood up to leave, he hesitated for a second, as if weighing whether to add anything. In the end, he just smiled and said goodnight. As I watched him walk away, I realized that our relationship was moving at its own pace, unhurried, like his footsteps on the path. And for the first time in a long time, I felt no urgency to speed it up. The following week brought those golden late summer days that make you forget the world beyond your fence. I spent mornings in the yard, afternoons with a book on the veranda, half hoping to see him appear. When he didn't, I convinced myself it was for the best. Whatever this was, it wasn't worth obsessing over. But one night, while I was washing my hands in the kitchen, I saw him through the window. He was standing at the edge of the patio, gazing at the jasmine flowers. It wasn't a casual step. It was intentional. I stepped outside, and the screen door clicked behind me. "Good night," I called. His smile was relaxed, but there was a hint of hesitation in it. "Good evening." I was coming from the workshop and thought I'd stop by to see how things are going. I laughed softly. "It's going slowly. Plants don't run. He leaned closer, his hands in his pockets. Nor should we. There was that implicit weight again, floating between the syllables. He looked at the bench under the olive tree, then at me. Do you mind if I sit down? We walked there, occupying the same spots as before. The air was warm, enveloping like a soft blanket. Fireflies flickered in the grass, and in the distance, a dog barked once before falling silent. After a while, Javier stirred a little, turning to me. Can I tell you something? I nodded, not knowing what was coming. When I lost my wife, I thought silence would be the worst thing. But no. The worst thing was realizing how much I'd closed myself off to others. People tried, but I made excuses to keep them away. I convinced myself it was safer that way. His words fell heavily between us, as the truth often does. I understand, I whispered. I've done the same thing in my own way. His gaze remained steady. Being here with you is different, like it doesn't have to be this way forever. Something in me shifted then, a subtle but irrevocable change. I didn't know if I was ready for what this entailed, but I did know that I didn't want to run away. It doesn't have to, I said. We were silent for a moment, letting the confession sink in. Then, as if to ground us, he took 2 perfectly ripe tomatoes out of a paper bag. From my garden, he explained almost shyly. I laughed and the tension eased. A bribe. More like a promise, he corrected. We talked until the stars covered the sky, our voices low, our conversation drifting from youthful memories to the small joys we'd learned to treasure. There was no rush, no search for endings, only the slow construction of something we both sensed without naming it. When he stood up, his hand rested briefly on the back of the bench. See you soon, I nodded. Sure. After he left, I stayed there for a while longer, the tomatoes in my lap, the air still warm from his nearness. I realized then that I had stopped stalking his steps, not out of disinterest, but because I knew they would return. The following days flowed in a rhythm I couldn't remember missing. Morning coffee, a little watering, the pulse of the neighborhood filtering through the air. I no longer anxiously awaited Javier. I simply lived, knowing that, at the right moment, he would reappear. It was a Sunday evening when I heard the creaking in the path. I was sitting on the bench under the olive tree, a closed book on my knees, the sun casting a long golden glow over the shadows in the courtyard. Javier approached, unhurried, with that measured stride, carrying a small wooden box in his hands. I made this for you, he said when he arrived. I looked at it, simple but exquisite, with warm wood grain and edges polished by her patience. It's beautiful, I murmured, running my fingers over it. What does it hold inside? She smiled slightly. Just a space for whatever you choose to hold, whatever's important. I opened it, empty, save for a faint scent of sandalwood. I understood that its contents didn't matter. It was the gesture, the offering, a place for treasures I would decide. We sat with the box between us, and for a long time we said nothing. The air carried the scent of jasmine and damp earth. The leaves whispered above our heads. When I finally looked at him, I saw the same firmness in his eyes as the first day, but now with a tinge of quiet confidence. I don't know where this is leading, I admitted quietly, but I like where we are. Me too, he replied. No rush. We stayed until the sun sank and an evening chill touched the air. When he stood up, he didn't retrieve the box. It's yours, he said simply. After he left, I held it for a moment, reflecting on how some bonds don't burst forth with fanfare or grand gestures. They arrive silently, like footsteps on a path, and grow in the gaps between words. That night, I placed the box on the nightstand next to my bed. I didn't put anything inside, not yet. I wanted to wait for the perfect moment, when something deserved that shelter. And as I turned off the light, I realized I was no longer wondering if Javier would return. I knew he would, and when his footsteps echoed again, firm and sure, I would be ready to welcome them, bringing with them that peace I, without knowing it, needed so much.